Hello and welcome back. Now, just before we get started, if you're watching this on the Total Somatics YouTube channel, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell. So whenever I release an episode, you find out very quickly. And also, if you haven't already checked it out, you can check out my TEDx talk. So if you go to YouTube and put in the search bar TEDx Heidi Hadley, you can see my talk there. And please give me a thumbs up, put comments and share with anyone that you know it resonates with. Okay, so let us get started with today's episode. And I have my little notes here because we actually have a very special guest. And I want to make sure that I blow her trumpet for her because she's absolutely brilliant. So let me give you a little bit of background here. So I'm going to introduce you to Debra Battersby. Now, Debra is a clinical counsellor, a psychotherapist and supervisor based in Chirnside Park, Victoria. That's in Australia. Now, Debra specialises in trauma and abuse recovery and relationship repair, helping clients rebuild a sense of safety and connection after experiences of emotional and relational wounding. She's the founder of Heart Life Counselling, where her approach integrates emotional focused therapy, somatic awareness, EMDR, and trauma informed care. With postgraduate training in developmental trauma and a Master of Counselling and over 22 years of counselling experience, Debra brings deep insight into how our nervous systems both hold pain and the potential for healing. Her work gently supports clients to reconnect with their inner world, helping them move from shame and self-doubt towards regulation, self-compassion, and wholeness. I told you she was great, didn't I? Okay, so with no further ado, I'm going to bring Debra in here. So how are you getting on, Debra?
I'm really well, thanks, Heidi. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I thought I'd just let everyone know, Debra. First met, didn't we, in March 2024 in Sydney. It was like a trauma 3 or 4 day workshop, wasn't it, in Sydney? So it was brilliant. We hit it off straight away, and it was really lovely to connect with you. We were just saying, we can't believe how long ago it was now.
I know, time's just flown.
I know, brilliant. Now, I was going to say, we are going to get discussing some really meaty subjects today. And it all started because Debra shared a really brilliant post on Facebook. And I saw it and I said, can we do a discussion on this in a podcast? So what I'm going to do is read it out to you. And then I've got lots of questions that I want to share with Debra that is really going to bring this out. And so let me just first of all bring this up. So I'm looking here at what Debra shared. So first of all, we'll have a look at what this title was about on Facebook. And it was about examples of invalidation. So there are a few bullet points here and statements that we can see these examples. One of them is, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. You're overly sensitive. You probably took it personally. You'll get over it. Just let it go. You're a strong person. It could be worse. God doesn't give you more than you can handle. Everything happens for a reason. I know exactly how you feel. You shouldn't be angry. Don't be sad. You make a big deal out of everything. That didn't happen. Stop making things up. You're overreacting. You probably misunderstood. So that's the bullet points. That was the examples. And then she put this great post underneath it, which is one I want to share with you. And it says, as humans, we all crave connection, belonging, and to be truly seen. But here's the truth. While it's normal to want understanding from others, we can't let them be the gatekeepers of our truth. Depending on others for validation can lead us to shrink, shapeshift, and sacrifice our authenticity just to fit in. You don't need to be less emotional to be loved. You don't need to abandon yourself to belong. You deserve to be heard, felt, and seen, especially by you. Isn't that powerful? So when I saw that, I said to Debra, could we please do a discussion on it? Because it's so important in so many areas. And so I'm going to ask Debra a few questions based about that. But I also wanted to merge this, and I mentioned to Debra if this was possible, how it would just flow naturally in the discussion. But when this podcast is released is in the month of November. And obviously, this is irrelevant for all year round, but there's two important dates in November. The first one is the 19th of November. And on the 19th of November, it's International Men's Day. And that acknowledges issues such as male suicide, domestic abuse, and social stigma that prevents men from seeking help. And also in November, we have on November the 25th every year, International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. So because of that being the case, I just thought it was so important to bring those factors in. And this is where I want to bring you in, Debra, if that's okay, because you shared that really powerful post and those phrases where what can happen is that people can basically invalidate other people's emotions. But why do you think people's emotional invalidation is so common, even if they mean well in what they're saying?
It's a really good question. And I think, it's one that often comes up. But I think, as human beings, we're actually not comfortable with emotional pain. So we tend to just kind of want to push it aside. And so with that, we have these just these comments that we think they're going to help us, but what they actually do is they invalidate what the person's trying to say or what they're feeling, but then people actually then get stuck in that because it has been invalidated. But then that leads to their mental health condition. If it's done repeatedly, we're not talking about a single incident, but that then can lead to depression, anxiety, because then people feel really anxious about being vulnerable and sharing their pain because they actually think it's going to be invalidated and nobody cares.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that in itself has quite a profound effect on the nervous system, doesn't it, as well? Because if somebody's repeatedly dismissed or invalidated for those emotions, how does that land on our nervous system? Because obviously we're looking at this quite somatically as well, aren't we?
Yeah. I guess with all due respect to the brain, we know the brain is an amazing organ, but it's almost like when it comes to emotional intelligence, I actually let people know the brain's actually dumb because the brain just responds to patterns of behavior, patterns of experiences, and it just determines that's right. So it just treats everything the same. It doesn't actually distinguish between what's helpful, what's unhelpful, and it doesn't actually help you to just automatically discard what's unhelpful, but it just takes it on board and assumes that it's right. And so then everything becomes a point of where people do experience lots of invalidation, that the world's dangerous, that there's no comfort, there's no sense of being seen or heard. There's no sense of being held because, when we share our pain, we're hoping that the other person can just hold that space with us and just go, wow, that's really tough.
Mm. Yeah, and I was thinking of the physiological side of it as well, with your nervous system. So like the tight chest, the shallow breathing, all those sorts of factors as well. And there's so much of that, the biology and then our psychology weaving in as well. So that kind of leads us even to feeling even more despondent, isn't it? Would you say that then makes you gravitate more asking for that greater level of validation if it's not being seen? Does that make sense? Because it's just the biology is feeding into that psychology even more.
Yeah, I think so. Because I guess it goes back to that post that I wrote. It's like at the core, we are driven for connection. We want to be seen. We want to be heard, and we want to know that what we feel matters. And it's not even necessarily that the other person's going to be able to fix it, but we just want to know that we're being attended to. And I think that goes right back to infancy. This is where, you think about a small baby, when they have a need, what do? They cry, and crying for an adult can be distressing. But if we can't manage our own nervous system, we then kind of heighten, but then we can't actually respond to the baby. But when a parent can calm themselves and respond to the baby, we then calm their nervous system. So that's where, even from infancy, we're teaching the nervous system that when you're distressed, you can find comfort, you can find understanding, and it just goes, oh, that feels so much better.
Yeah. It's something actually with that whole generational thing. I know I've got a few questions leading on to that, so I don't want to jump too far ahead with that, but that's so powerful, isn't it? So hopefully we'll weave into that a bit more, because a few extra little pointers there that will probably come into it. But I was thinking, thinking of your post that you put, some people they have these expressions, these phrases that are quite validating, but like something like everything happens for a reason. And so what can we do when we recognize that they're trying to be positive, but actually what it's doing is masking that emotional invalidation? What can we do to manage that situation?
So you mean for the person that's having that said to them?
Yeah, because that's the thing, is, as you said, like sometimes people don't realize that they're saying those things, do they? Really, they don't realize that they're invalidating someone's emotion by saying something like everything happens for a reason. So the person that's landing on, so that person that needs that support, um how can they manage that? But also, I suppose, how would you say both parties would deal with that situation? Is that something to break down?
Well, that's a big question.
It's a
So,
huge question, sorry.
okay, so I mean, there's two lines of thinking there, because if you've got, so okay, so you've got, let's just say there's two people that are both being said, well, these things happen for a reason. If you've got person number one that has got a healthy sense of self, they know how to ground themselves, they know that, well, yes, that might be true, but this is unhelpful in this moment. They can almost like just create, almost like step back from the comment and protect themselves and not take it on board, and just recognize that this person doesn't know what else to say. So it's, appreciate the effort, but it's really not, that's not helpful right now. But they're not, I guess, damaged by it, or they're not kind of feeling invalidated by it, because that person's actually got a health sense of self-validation, and was perhaps just looking for a little bit of support, a little bit of comfort, a little bit of, a little bit of validation from someone else. But then if you've got someone that is accustomed to being invalidated, that actually can lead to anger. And that's where then that anger then gets internalized. It then gets stored in the body. And that's where, thinking somatically, it's like that it's almost like it sinks into the pit of their stomach, where they can feel quite heavy, they're angry, and so it's like all their muscles. So then they're kind of like holding themselves together, and maybe just wanting to create distance. So again, there's that loss of connection, that loss of feeling like they matter.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose when you were saying before about feeling heard, I suppose it's that real empathy that will come in. So if somebody was feeling that, you'd acknowledge it when you say, that must have been really painful. I'm here for you. So it's simple like that. So as you say, it's not the fixer, but it's just like, as you said before, it's acknowledging it and sitting with it, really, isn't it?
Yeah. And even just to say, I think rather than saying, well, these things happen for a reason, it might be more helpful to say, it's hard to understand why these things happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's such a small shift from invalidation to validate, because it's like when you say, well, these things happen for a reason, is almost this sense of you can feel the other person's discomfort.
Mm.
But the reality is that we don't know why these things happen.
Mm.
And so just to be able to sit with that, it's like we're comfortable with what we don't know and what we don't understand.
Mm. And I suppose that can just lead to other sort of open discussions, but it really slams the door shut when you go, everything happens for a reason. It just slams it shut, doesn't it? And then that's when they push that emotion back down, and other things can happen. I suppose it's just keeping the avenues of communication and releasing whatever that situation is out, bringing it out.
Because when someone hears, well, these things happen for a reason, it's like, well, of course, well, well, tell me what it is. It's like it actually provokes a reaction. It actually doesn't bring comfort.
Mm.
And if people have even if there's any concept of God, it's kind of like, well, it must be God's fault, well, God's punishing me. And so, but it just opens up a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
Because people are then going to grapple with, well, if everything happens for a reason, what's the reason? Why would the universe, why would whatever allow this to happen if there's a
Yeah.
reason? Well, tell me what you can hear the energy in that. There's a lot
Yeah.
of anger and angst in it, where
Mm.
if what they hear is it's really hard to understand why these things happen, you can almost feel the whole
Mm.
body just kind of
Yeah.
relaxes.
So yeah, I was thinking that, for listeners that may have grown up with an environment where there was a lot of invalidation, what would you say would be the first steps to begin healing and also reclaiming that trust in their emotions? Because this is a learned behavior, isn't it? It's often come from childhood. And like you just mentioned a moment ago, that we don't realize because that's been our norm our whole life. So what would be that first step?
I'm just thinking about some clients that I've been working with, and when you've grown up with invalidation, that's your normal.
Mm.
You don't know any different. And so everything that you feel and everything you've been told, and even all your reactions, they're just normal. I generally find it's when those people come into some sort of connection or relationship, and it doesn't necessarily mean a romantic relationship, but just have a connection with someone that's healthier, that might actually point out to you, why are you overreacting? It's like, why, you know, um, which actually then causes them to just take that tiny step and maybe self-reflecting. And particularly if they get told by a few people, why are you overreacting? Then they can actually start to think, well, maybe I need to get some help.
Mm.
Maybe, maybe, well, people keep saying I shouldn't feel this way. But I guess there's an invalidating way that can be said. But then, so let me give an example. So if I was to say, well, you shouldn't feel that way, even just the tone in that is actually invalidating,
Mm.
versus, hey, why are you feeling that way? Because they're actually reacting out of past invalidation and not actually able to see that they're actually being supported or validated in that moment. I don't know if this is making sense.
Yeah, it does. It just made me think as well, because that was quite a contrast with those two statements. Would that sometimes trigger out things with people when you said that first one? And it sounded like a head teacher or a parent scolding someone. You think of the inner child. Does it pull up that stuff as well? Because
Oh,
then when you
100%.
because your tone on the second one was like, hey, which was really like quite a nice and approachable. And then you went into the question rather than it being strict. And I
Yeah.
just thought, oh, I felt the contrast. And I thought if that's something that was
Yeah.
to trigger a person, that's
Yeah.
quite powerful.
Yeah. Because then that can then, if, there is something about them feeling it in the body. I know when I try and get people to slow down and stay with the different and actually allow them to feel it in their body. Because with invalidation, what we tend to do is we cut off at the neck and we
Mm,
become very, very cerebral.
mm,
And so even when something good is happening or when they're validated, I say, how does that feel? And they kind of look at you like deer in headlights. They go, I don't know.
mm,
I don't know what I feel. And so that's where we pause. And I just get them to stay with that. Because if they can start to feel it in their body, then they can start to make room. Then they can start to kind of ask themselves, well, hey, is this actually an overreaction? Or actually, is this reaction appropriate?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I was thinking about that. And if you've got somebody, say, that's that expression, what is it, like highly sensitive people? So if you bring that into, if you bring that into the equation, how does emotional invalidation affect somebody that's highly sensitive? I mean, what can they do to protect their emotional boundaries? Because you could have what we were mentioning before, but then add that extra aspect onto it.
I think with HSPs, they have to have an awareness that they do feel and sense things more acutely than the average person. And to know that it's not wrong and it's not bad, but they have to learn how to manage that. And they need to develop their own level of awareness around how to protect themselves. And I guess it's about adjusting their expectations. And they were kind of almost like go off on another tangent. But when we hold expectations that when we share our pain, for example, that the other person, the listener, should be able to hear our pain, we actually set ourselves up to be, I guess, invalidated, because not everybody can do that. So we actually have to know that just because we share something doesn't mean the other person has the capacity or has the willingness to actually be with us in our pain. And so that's where they will generally use invalidation, or just, even if it's not invalidating, just something that's very dismissive as a way of, let's not talk about that. We just kind of want to just sort of move past that. It's like, oh, yeah, whatever. And just sort of get on with something that's not confronting.
Yeah. Because the thing is, I'm assuming with HSP people, their default would be to numb and detach. Is that right? Would they just shut down in that way as
Yeah,
well?
they can, or they become distressed, because they can go either way, because they can either then try and become heightened in trying to get the other person to understand or to see what they see or feel what they feel, but the other person may not have that capacity, or they will isolate themselves and just keep themselves away from people because they don't find people safe. And that's really sad.
Yeah, yeah. And so, in that side, would you say both of them, it's all about grounding techniques and that side of things as well? Because obviously you've got both ends of that spectrum. Thinking of the whole polyvagal system, I was thinking of the two ends of
Yeah,
that spectrum. So it's bringing them back into that window of capacity, isn't it, or that window of tolerance? Would you
yeah,
say it's bringing both ends, bringing that grounding in as well?
yeah. Look, I think that's a really great model to sort of look at, because, it, well, in the polyvagal, they use green as the grounded. That's where your nervous system is calm and relaxed, and we feel connected. We can be creative. We can be spontaneous. But when we go into the yellow zone, that's when we're then going into fight flight, and that's where you think about, that's where the reactions are. But it may not. So even when you're trying to share your pain with someone, they may be in their green zone and all of a sudden get flipped into that yellow fight flight, which is where they're reacting. And so now you've got two people in fight flight for different reasons. So you might have one that just wants to shut everything down, which is probably more your fight, and then the other one that's wanting to distance. And so, but then when the invalidation gets quite, really bad or prolonged, I'd say over a protracted period of time, then people can go up into the red zone, which is what they call the freeze. But the freeze isn't necessarily frozen in the sense that you can't move, but it's internally you're frozen, you can't move. And that's where depression comes in, feeling really shut down. And it very much is then strongly embodied, and that's where it's really hard to get people moving because they've completely disconnected.
Yeah, yeah. It's I was just thinking of, because I mentioned at the beginning about domestic violence and even about like male suicide and that sort of thing. And I was just thinking, how could we just bring something in there just to support? Obviously, if anyone's feeling that, then obviously reach out to those bodies and those support mechanisms. But just wondering if you've got any advice on anybody there, just keeping it quite generalized in that sense. But is there anything you can help? Because if you've got somebody that's been in either a domestic violence situation, or you've got, I've mentioned earlier about for International Men's Day, acknowledging issues like male suicide, domestic abuse, and that social stigma that prevents men from seeking help. So just thinking of those two, the different sides of the spectrum, are you able, with all your experience as well, of what would you say again could be that first step of them getting that help or just moving forward? Because as you say, if they don't want to speak to anyone, that's a challenge in itself. We need to kind of see if we can help them in that way.
Wow, again, another big question. Okay, so let's start with the suicide. I think by the time people don't just generally speaking, people don't just wake up one day and go from being content with their life, yeah, okay, everyone's got their problems, to wanting to kill themselves. That doesn't happen overnight. So it's actually being aware of what's happened perhaps in the months or years beforehand. And I think you'll often find there's been a lot of invalidation, particularly for men. Men, I think back to my generation, boys were not taught and were not allowed to have emotions. There was this very rigid stereotype that was kind of enforced onto males. And, having, if a boy, I'm talking about a child, if a boy cried, it was kind of like, oh, don't be a sissy. Well, there's massive invalidation right there. Little boys hurt too. Little boys need to cry. And if they've grown up where their own pain, no matter what it was, is continually shut down, that doesn't just go away. It just all gets stored inside internally. And it builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up until they get to a point where I think they look at their life and they don't know where to start. They feel so overwhelmed and they've been so invalidated that they don't believe anybody's interested or that there's any help out there. So it's about actually finding, I would say, particularly around suicide, finding a trauma-informed counsellor that's got training in trauma and understanding particularly the generational side of things and how it happens developmentally over a lifespan. That would be really helpful. But to actually realise that there is actually help out there.
Brilliant. And I really appreciate you identifying, saying trauma-informed counselling. So it's a very specific approach as well.
Yeah. Because if you've got somebody that's at that level, it's no point going to somebody that's only been trained in cognitive behavioural therapy, CBT. It's just change the way you think, you'll behave different and you'll feel better. Well, I mean, that's very simplistically put, but that's been my experience in all the years I've been working with trauma, that CBT is more often not very ineffective, but they need a trauma-informed approach. And that is about understanding how it gets stored internally, and it's not all up here. If we just try and approach trauma from here, we're going to miss everything that's going on here. That's the inner child work. That's all the rules that we've built up within ourselves that often sit in the unconscious, not in our conscious mind. And so if we kind of fix this from a conscious perspective, it would have been done already. But we've actually got to get in touch with the parts of ourselves that we've disconnected from.
Yeah, yeah. What about just because it's a massive subject with domestic violence, but what about, say, with women, say they've got out of that situation, what would the first step be to build their worth again? Because again, there's all that invalidation, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. Um, I guess the first step is actually to begin to recognize that you're not the problem. Often in domestic violence, and this look, some men are victims of women that are perpetrators. I think it's really important to actually
Yeah,
acknowledge that.
yeah,
There's such a stereotype out there that it's always men and women are the victims. My
yeah.
experience is that that's not always true. In fact, on that note, I think there's almost like a double shame when it's a man that's been abused by a woman
Mm,
because he is a man and, he's been beaten up by a woman. And so it's much, much harder for them to seek professional help and to actually be validated in what they've experienced. So I think, there has to be, again, finding a good trauma-informed counsellor that understands that dynamic. Now I've lost my thought.
but but it's true though, isn't it? And again, it's trauma informed counselling.
Yeah,
That's the key thing, isn't it? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So again, so I guess coming back to what I started to say, that whether it's a man or a woman, it's actually recognizing that what you've experienced actually is abuse.
Mhm.
It's not healthy. And at some level, they already know that, but to actually go, this actually wasn't right. How I'm being treated isn't okay. And now it's time for me to understand, how did I get here? And then how do I begin the process of healing and not just recovering, but actually rebuilding?
Mm, yeah. No, that's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Deborah. I just wanted to bring that extra bit in to our discussion just because I think it's so important. And as you say, like when you were talking about like with the men's side of things, it's just that build up over the years, isn't it, of that invalidation as well, either men or women, but particularly, and I'm the same as you, feel very strongly about the men. I've over like over about a 30-year period, I lost quite a few male friends to suicide. So it's something that's really passionate, and needs to be kind of shown a lot more, for
Yeah.
that reason, from what you were saying. So, but I just want to change track again. And we were talking about like authenticity and belonging, because I'm going to just mention that statement that you put in your Facebook post, and you wrote that depending on others for validation can lead us to shrink, shape shift, and sacrifice our authenticity to fit in. So, what does it look like when someone begins reclaiming their authenticity after years of people pleasing?
Again, really good question. It often, they often feel really guilty. They feel incredibly uncomfortable and they think they're being incredibly selfish because they're just not comfortable with looking after themselves or considering themselves. They get worried that, people are going to, well, I guess they're often worried that it's going to be further invalidation, and that it's going to be validated that they are selfish, and that, I know the number of people that have coming out of those kind of abusive relationships, that there can sometimes be pressure that they need to go back. So again, there's a really high form of invalidation, because again, people are uncomfortable with the idea that maybe there's a good reason to leave this relationship. And it's not to say that, people walk out after the first fight. That's not what we're talking about here. But they actually need to, again, they need to have a network of safe people around them that can actually help them to share their story and actually go, you know what, how you were treated is not right. You deserve better. So again, finding someone to, some people can do this journey successfully on their own, but some people need to find somebody professional that can help them really disentangle and how they kind of got there. Because, for some people, until they can understand how they ended up in that kind of relationship, this is where we then see they go to the next person that is the same person with a different name.
Yeah.
Then we go from one abusive relationship to the other because they haven't figured out what it is they need to figure out about why are they attracted to this type of person. And that often goes back to family of origin.
Yeah. And it kind of ties back to your point when you were saying we're all about patterns. And so it's a deeply ingrained pattern, isn't it? A pattern of behavior. As you say, it kind of, and I'm assuming again, that's where you'd say a trauma-informed counsellor as well, because they will delve into those aspects to see why, how you can be like a break, like a circuit breaker in that pattern, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we are creatures of habit. And our brain, there's a whole neurobiology around why we kind of keep being drawn to patterns of behavior that even if we know they're unhealthy and they're not good for us, but it's probably another whole topic, but it's the power of the brain. Because if we've set up good patterns and we've got a good sense of self and we've got good boundaries, the brain just identifies the patterns. And so it actually what they call myelinate those neural pathways to go, okay, this is really important. This is how we respond in these situations. This is how we that. So then when you're in an unhealthy situation, the brain's already programmed to go, no, we don't make room for that. This is what we prefer, which is positive. But then you flip it over, and this is where the brain's actually dumb. You've got all these negative, invalidating patterns in your life, and the brain just goes, oh, okay, this must be really important, so we're going to myelinate that so that you always feel this, you always respond this way. So when we're actually wanting to bring about change, that's why it feels so incredibly uncomfortable, because the brain is actually going, no, we don't think this way. No, we don't. And it's constantly trying to pull you back into those habitual patterns to maintain that normal, even though it's not healthy.
It kind of is the easier route, isn't it, in a sense?
Yeah. And so we have to be determined that we want to develop, again, starting with, and oftentimes starts with self-validation, that no, I actually deserve better. And I don't need to put up with this. I can actually start again and what have you. But that again is going to push against old rules that you've lived by.
That's brilliant. No, that's brilliant. And it kind of pinched my next question. So you've covered that really well, actually. So thank you for that. It was brilliant. But I wanted to jump back to about generational patterns, because it all kind of weaves in a little bit. And so emotional invalidation, it can be passed through the generations, because you talked about that at the beginning. But how can families, or one of those family members, because it could be just one within that whole lot, break that cycle?
That is a very courageous person, because they're actually going against patterns that have been set up over the generations. If it's not inappropriate, I guess I've been that person in my own family line. There's been, just when I look back across both my family lines, there was just so much abuse. Invalidation was pretty high, and ignoring what was right in front of you. So then when I became an adult, I actually looked back on my life and just thought, I don't want to reproduce what I've grown up with. And so I made a promise to myself that I was going to create something different. So, pushing boundaries, pushing against the old has actually been an intentional journey, and one that has bore much fruit.
That's good. Thank you for sharing that. It really is that lived experience. So when you're working with people, you've got a real deep empathy, and you also know the challenges because, like, as you mentioned before, is our nervous system, our brain likes to go back to whatever is the easiest, what was the default. So I can imagine in the early days, there's a lot of that inner turmoil and that inner narrative that has to be worked through, doesn't it? So thank you for sharing that, because that is really important, isn't it?
Well, I guess it's really easy to sort of go and read the books, but when you've actually had to walk it out, that's a whole new ball game. And I guess, through my work, it's I guess I feel as a counsellor, I can't take people where I haven't been. So, it kind of starts here, and then I get to pass on and share the tips and tricks that I've learned along the way, but also be able to sit comfortably with the challenges and I can see when people's nervous systems are pushing against something healthier, because no matter how good something is, all our brain looks at is it's unknown, therefore it's a danger, and fear just kicks in. Fear will always try and rob you of the new possibilities. And that's where the brain, those neural pathways, they are activated by danger. So again, unknown, unfamiliar is danger. So therefore fear, to actually keep you stuck and keep you loyal to the old.
Wow. It's it's really interesting, because when you mentioned that as well, it's I'm just sorry, I'm kind of thinking of some of the sort of situations and scenarios as well, but I suppose what I'm thinking of is when you've been in that situation as well, because I'm thinking of my own personal stuff, because again, you kind of come into this field because of what you've been through. But, obviously a bit like with you, I've done lots of work, and to work with people with trauma, you have to do your own stuff first.
100%.
But it makes, I was thinking about the highly sensitive person. That's what I was thinking about, is how you become quite attuned to some of those real subtle non-verbal things, because you've been there, or you felt it, or you can see the fear in someone else. And it really is, I've often said to people, it's a challenging expression in itself, but just to say, like, if you can trust the process,
Yeah.
because that's really what it is.
Yeah. And it's not, it's when you're talking about this level of change, yes, it does take commitment and dedication. This isn't something that gets fixed in 6 or 10 sessions, perhaps, but it's going to be a starting point. But, it becomes a lifetime commitment to just going from strength to strength to strength to strength. It's not about, whenever you change one thing, there'll be the next thing that will be waiting for you. But it's like, but you're going to deal with that next thing from a stronger position.
Mm. I like using the expression somas exist in time. I'm always saying that, and it gives us that permission to know that how we feel today, we validate that, we notice it, we process that, but we're constantly adapting. And I think that gets rid of that perfectionism, to know that it fluctuates. Again, we might have a great day, might not have a great time, or whatever, but because we're existing in time, and as you say, we're building up a greater window of capacity, aren't we, or window of tolerance to manage these future situations too.
So, again, using that model, if you've lived most of your life in the yellow zone, which is fight flight, because of the invalidation, and perhaps home hasn't been somewhere that's safe, it's somewhere where you're constantly feeling for, how's everybody else doing, is it safe today, can I kind of relax a bit, then that green zone, the window of tolerance for feeling peaceful and calm, is actually going to be very narrow. So the more you're able to work with what's happened that's put you in the yellow zone, slowly, that green zone starts to widen and you have more and more capacity. And again, that's where the body work is really important, because if they can't, it's almost like if they, so I know for a while I thought, oh, look, I don't want to be pushing ideas of, what people need to experience to sort of make room. But where people have kind of like, yeah, no, I get it, but it's very much a head thing. It's like it doesn't really stick. But if I can get them to sit with it and push past this barrier, it's almost like there's a ceiling here. If I can get them to push through here to actually connect into their body and actually notice, where do you feel, so whatever that feeling, whatever they've got a word for it, where do you feel that in your body? And that might take them 10 or 20 minutes just to connect with that one feeling. But once they can get it into their body and feel it in their body, you've just physically, I know as soon as they've done that, because I just watch the whole body, it's like,
it's a shift. Yeah.
There's a shift. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now we've got room for that down here. It's not just head knowledge.
Yeah. Because that's, again, going back to those patterns of behavior, that was their survival mechanism, was to stay up here. So how can I get myself out of the situation? How can I say the right thing to please that person? How can I keep the peace? Walking on eggshells, all these sorts of things. So it was just learned up here, pure survival, because we didn't feel safe to sit there and have insight and contemplate and go, how's my breath today? It just wasn't going to happen.
It's like you were still breathing. That was sufficient.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. No, that was brilliant. Thank you. Now, I was going to say, I've got another question here, just a couple more, if that's okay with you. And I put that you highlight that invalidation sends the message that you don't matter.
Yeah.
So how can people begin to rewrite that message and embody the belief that they actually do matter?
It starts with themselves. That's simple. Because if even though and I guess I'll come back to my own story. I mean, I was always invalidated. Needs weren't, there was no room for me to have a need. If I could choose to self-sacrifice a need, then that was championed. So to have a need it wasn't something that I considered. And it wasn't until I was actually, which is a bit embarrassing, I was actually in my probably well into my 30s, and I actually did something nice for myself. And, I was blown away by how guilty I felt that I had done something really nice for myself. It was such a powerful counter reaction, that's actually was my wake-up call, that I could actually step away from myself for a moment and just go, that is absolutely ridiculous. And so I had to actually convince myself in that moment that I am allowed to do something nice for myself, because that was breaking every rule that I'd grown up with and that I'd had in my marriage.
I was going to say the guilt's really interesting, isn't it? Because it kind of ties, when you were mentioning, when we were talking about authenticity and belonging, I actually had them in my head, the word guilt, because I think that's what I'd say if anyone listening to this today or watching this today, is that might be that feeling that they have, or there's those expressions that can come through generations of navel gazing, self-obsessed, self-indulgent. Is that those kind of words as well? Would you say that was what you felt, even if it wasn't in your narrative, but did it feel it somatically?
It's like somewhere, even if you don't have words for it, but in the guilt, you're breaking a cardinal rule. You're breaking the family rule. The rule that you have kept yourself by, you have just broken it. Now you've created danger. You've created the danger because you've broken the rule. And when you break the rule, bad things happen. You know, and if we can't get a hold of that internal narrative, and it doesn't necessarily have words. It took me a long time to kind of put language around it, but it's just spontaneous. The pressure that put on you to maintain the safety rules is so powerful. And that's where it's the guilt. The guilt is an anxiety that it provokes is just huge.
Well, that's really interesting that you mentioned that though, Deborah, because it kind of makes me think of that next question because of your own like lived experience on that. And really, I've got my question here is what daily practices do you recommend for reconnecting with and also honoring emotions, especially for those that have learned to suppress them? Because that's the big thing, isn't it? That learned behavior again.
Because I think I wish I could say it would be something really simple, like, just kind of self-reflect. But when you've been so conditioned through invalidation and through trauma and abuse, you've actually lost that capacity. And it's almost like particularly when we're talking about trauma survivors, it's like they almost need an experience that jolts them out of that false reality. And I guess that's where, for me, that story I just shared was where I did something nice for myself and I was absolutely slammed with guilt and anxiety to the point where it actually woke me up because I realized this is just ridiculous. Once I had that realization that my reaction was extreme and that I am allowed to go out and buy something nice for myself, it wasn't to the detriment of my children. They were well fed and well cared for and everything else. I'm allowed to do something nice for me. That's where I started to do the check-in. And then I started reflecting because probably up until then, I really didn't ask the critical questions of where did I learn that? Where did I learn that it's not okay to do nice things for myself? What are the rules that I've learned to keep myself safe? And one of them was don't have needs.
Hmm.
And so with that, then it took time. Please, this didn't happen overnight. This was quite a slow journey to begin to unpack. And I guess for me, it actually was the beginning of opening Pandora's box to realize how toxic my family was, my marriage was, but I was no longer there. I was now a single mum raising my two children, but I had created a safe home. So now I could actually begin to unpack where I learned and what were the rules that I learned, what was the environment that I learned them in. Now what do I want to exchange them for? And I could begin the process of exchanging those rules.
You shared something really powerful there, Deborah, which if anyone's listening, it's just if you're able to elaborate, because you actually said something and I thought, yeah, that would happen, is that when you have that initial guilt or whatever that feeling is, what can sometimes people's behavior be with that? Will they just try and shut it down? Or they think, oh, I won't do that again? Or what's the kind of pattern that can happen? Or even with yourself, because obviously it wasn't straight away that eureka moment. Sometimes it's like that, obviously that guilt feeds something else. And then does it make you think, why am I doing this for? Can you see where I'm going with that? And if
Yeah.
somebody's feeling that, what would you say as regards to the approach?
It's you have to have the conviction that what I'm feeling is not right. It's like, yes, it's what I've learned, but it's like, buying something nice for myself it's not like you have to determine it wasn't negligent, it wasn't extravagant. It's not like I went and, bought a $50,000 ring or anything like that. but you have to actually challenge everything that you're thinking and believing against what is actually reasonable. And so I had to come to the decision that me buying something nice for myself was not unreasonable, therefore it was reasonable. That was the beginning point. Then I would seek help to do the deeper work, because that's where it then began to unmask just how toxic my life up until that point had been and how it had been controlled. But sometimes we want different, but we're not quite sure what different looks like. But one by one, I had to start swapping those core beliefs, because that's what they were. They became core beliefs for safety. So for that example, it's not safe for me to have needs and to want nice things. I swapped that out for it's perfectly okay for me to have needs and like nice things. And then make room for that and just calm my nervous system, consciously calm my nervous system by just keep reaffirming it's okay. It's okay.
Yeah. They're big, strong patterns though, aren't they? So that's why if anyone's watching this today, obviously I'm going to make sure that in the show notes for this, we've got you've written a PDF, haven't you? So that's going to be available. And I'll just read that. It's called Feeling Seen, Emotional Validation versus Invalidation, because what you're mentioning is and it's so inspiring to see and to hear your own personal story. But as you say, that didn't just change overnight. That took a lot of work. And I can imagine, just knowing that you'd be the same with in your professional life as well as your personal life, that you see yourself personally or you see it professionally, how people take a few steps forward, then something happens and there might be a little few steps back. And that's literally what happens. And so if someone is in that position, it's again not to be hard on themselves. If they're making that progress and there's that growth, then there's a little bit of regression. It's not a negative thing at all. But is that all right just to add on to that? Because if someone's listening to that and feeling that at the moment.
And I guess it's because, again, remembering that the brain's fundamentally dumb, all it knows is these are the rules that we've set up to keep you safe. You are breaking those rules. So again, comes back to that neural pathway. It's like you have gone out and bought something that doesn't fit this narrative. Therefore, I mean, you've got no idea the pressure I put on myself to take that thing back and get a refund. And that's what I meant, how crazy. But you know what I realized? The number of times I had actually done that in the years leading up to that, where I would get something, I would get home and all that somatic pressure would come on myself and I would make some lame excuse and take it back and get a refund, only to calm my nervous system.
Wow.
And that's where on this one particular occasion where I actually realized this is ridiculous. So again, it's actually, it's very humbling to actually look at how you actually manage. And there's all these little behaviors that we do to keep ourselves safe by following the rules. And if we break the rules, our nervous system will by default instruct us what we need to do to put things right, even when it's terribly wrong.
It's been wonderful, Debra, and I'm sure everybody around the world that's listening to this today is going to be so appreciative, because with all your experience, and as I say, your lived life experience as well, it really adds that other dimension to it, really. And so that's why I just want everyone to know that there is a website if you ever want to connect with Debra or you want to find any more information. We'll put these details in the show notes, but her website is heartlifecounselling.com.au. So that's heartlifecounselling.com.au. So, and she's also got a Facebook page, which is Heart Life Counselling. As I said, I'll put all that in the show notes, but and also I'll put the PDF in there, which is the handout, which we just mentioned, Feeling Seen, Emotional Validation versus Invalidation, a somatic awareness guide for reconnecting with your inner reality. So I did say to everybody, Debra, that you were pretty cool and very impressive, and you certainly were. It's been an absolutely wonderful, wonderful episode. Thank you so much for spending time with me, and everybody spending that time to really grow and develop from what Debra's shared. But before we finish off, Debra, is there anything that you would like to share that we haven't brought out, or it's just come into your mind at this point now?
I think just, I want to say, sometimes, so if I look back at my past self, it's sometimes it feels easier because of all the pressure we put on our nervous system puts on us to keep the rules. But what our nervous system doesn't know is that at the same time, it's also robbing us of future possibilities.
Yeah.
And I look at the woman that I was back then, I doubt that I'd be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't done that journey myself. But I've seen the richness that's come into my life by dealing with all that. I can remember sitting in it all one day, just as a metaphor, and I sort of said to God, I said, I feel like, because I was opening up Pandora's box. I feel like there's this dirty big dump truck full of manure that's backed into my driveway and dumped it at my door. That's how it felt, just this pile. But then I heard, you're a gardener. And I went, yes. And I heard, what do you do with manure? And I went, well, if you put it straight on the garden, you actually you kill your plants. So you actually have to process it. And then it becomes rich fertilizer for growth.
Wow. What a beautiful metaphor. Wow. Yeah.
So that's what got me through my pile of manure.
Yeah. Wow. It really is that sliding doors moment, isn't it? I don't know about you, but I think of things in my life, some really black, dark times, rock bottom, and you think they were probably the biggest life lessons. It's where the greatest growth actually was, and I'm sure you'd agree, Debra. But it's where you really dig deep and you build that empathy, and things aren't black and white, and you can't be dogmatic, and and everything's so different, isn't it? But they are those darkest times that the greatest growth comes, which can be a really hard thing for anyone to hear now that's in that manure. But we've both been there in a lot of manure, a lot.
Yeah.
And it really does become that sliding doors moment, doesn't it? And you think of what you've been able to give to the world as a result of being in that manure, and I think the same as well. It stank at the time,
Oh,
but as
yeah.
you say, the growth that's come from it.
Yeah.
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 Wow.
Don't let fear or even overwhelm of, as I, because that was kind of how overwhelmed I felt when I felt like my whole world had been exposed of what I was living under. But I wouldn't change.
No.
I wouldn't change one moment of it. Has it been hard? Yeah. But when you're wanting to change those lifetime patterns, you have to just come at it with commitment and determination. And I know there were times where as part of breaking those rules, literally fighting with my nervous system, fighting with myself, that part of me that was like, no, this is what we do to stay safe. And this other part going, no, but we don't want to live like that anymore. And I would find myself standing there, verbally having this argument with myself and stamping my foot and going, no, we are not living like that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm choosing this way, and so you can come with me, but we're going this way. But it's like there were just those times where it was through sheer determination. I am not giving in with fear to the old, this is how we keep safe patterns.
Yeah. It's amazing. Thank you so much, Debra. And thank you so, so much. I mean, wow, we covered a lot here. We covered a lot. So, but I think they're the most genuine podcast when people share that with people, so you can speak from the heart, from that experience. So yeah, I just want to say thank you so much again, Debra, and thank you everyone for today. And I just want to send Debra some hugs and kisses through the airways, and then also to all our listeners and all our viewers around the world. As I said, give you the little cue again if you want to follow Debra on Facebook. It's Heart Life Counselling, and if you want to go to her website, it's heartlifecounselling.com.au. And as I said, I'll put all the details, and I'll put her handout as well. I'll put that in the show notes too. So thank you everyone again, wherever you are around the world. And I don't know if you want to say goodbye again, Debra. Say all these final goodbyes.
I was just thinking, if people are wanting to embrace change, I've got a handout that I've put together just on the challenges of change. So just to normalize the challenges you're going to face. But if you're determined for change, that's a courageous journey, and it's a hero's journey.
Yeah.
So, if they just want to send me like a Facebook message or something, and I'll drop them a PDF copy of Challenges of Change, if that's where they're at, if they're wanting to change or they're struggling with change and they want it, I'll just send them that little handout.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Debra. That is so good. And that's the thing with all the rich resources that you have, and that you can pivot and go wherever that situation is. So that's the great thing. And I think that's the most wonderful thing, is that this podcast is listened globally. So nowadays we don't have to worry about, we might be in Australia and someone's listening to this on the other side of the planet. They can contact you straight away. So there might be a bit of a delay, everyone, because of the time difference. But Debra will be in touch. She will. So fantastic.
Thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you so much, Debra. So I'm going to promise everyone now, this is our final goodbye. Okay. So I'm going to say again, all my love, all my very best wishes to you. And I will see you in our next episode. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me today. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating and also forward this on to somebody you know will benefit. To learn more about pain relief, plus how to improve your health and well-being, go to totalsomatics.com. Until next time, take care.